somewhat exotic for Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and the flute player isn't playing the familiar songs, but they are familiar to the island's Lebanese community. It's New Year's, and there's some celebrating going on. It's got something to do with the passage of time and the traditional reflecting and taking stock that accompanies the end of an old year. But there's something here that goes beyond New Year's resolutions. The Lebanese community is celebrating its 98th year on the island, has become an integral part of island life. But it wasn't always that way. When they first came, they were the great outsiders, the ones truly from away, the husbands who took to the roads and peddled, and the wives who stayed indoors, alone, because they had no English. The Lebanese community, individually and as a discernible group among islanders, have literally traveled the world in their search to build a new home. And it's by keeping the best of the life they led in Lebanon that they've succeeded. In a way, the now traditional New Year's levee is a measure of that success. They say the Lebanese levee is held a week after New Year's, because the very first year, all the halls in town were booked with other people's levees. But if the Lebanese hold their party separately, it hardly matters, because everybody else joins in. If the sense of separation and difference is still there, it isn't as important as the sense of togetherness and of finally being at home. The first immigrants came from countryside like this, the hills dotted with cedar trees. The brilliant blue skies and the equally impressive beaches were left behind. So were the complexities and oppressions of an ancient land, resigned through the years to playing host to foreign powers. It had been home, but as the growing spirit of opportunism gripped the end of the last century, some more adventurous souls were off for other lands.
The beginnings of the Lebanese immigration to PEI are a little bit obscure. They started coming about 100 years ago. The first Lebanese, as far as I can tell, arrived here in 1888. And then they began coming through the 1890s and into the early 1900s. A lot of them would come first to Montreal because the second language of the Lebanese was French. So Montreal was a natural, and then they would radiate out from there. There were also quite a few of them in Nova Scotia. I know there was a man in Nova Scotia, I believe his name was Curry, and he was promoting immigration. He was bringing over people from Lebanon, paying their passage, putting them on the road with a pack, and then getting his money back.
William Shama recalls how his father Joseph came to Prince Edward Island.
Well, as far as I know, my father left the old country in 1900. He came to this country in 1900. And his ticket was for Montreal. He landed in Montreal. He peddled there for a short while, but didn't like the bigger cities, and he heard about some more Lebanese people being down in Nova Scotia, so he made his way down there. And he peddled there for a while, and this day he happened to be down at the wharf, and he had his pack with him, and this boat was loading. And he asked a gentleman standing by him, "Where does that boat go to?" He says, "Over to Prince Edward Island." He says, "What's over there?" Well, he says, "It's a farming community pretty much the same as here." And he says, "Well, gosh, I must go over and see what is over there, see what it's like." So he got a ticket, and he got on the boat, he got his ticket, and he come over here, and the boat landed in the evening, and he stayed at a hotel on Water Street, up at the head of the wharf. The next morning he got up, he says to the man at the desk, "Where's the railway station?" He says, "Just go down the street," he says, "and you'll come to the railway station." So he went into the station, he says to the ticket agent, "I want to go to the country." Well, the ticket agent asked him, "Where do you want to go?" Well, he says, "I don't know, anywhere in the country." So he sold him a ticket for 50 cents to Hunter River. He got off at Hunter River and he started pedaling around there, and he done fairly well, and he liked the country. So after a day or two, he come back to Charlottetown, got settled in Charlottetown. From then on, kept peddling on the island here.
Many of the peddlers who arrived here at first were penniless. They simply had no way of establishing themselves in a settled business, and so peddling was a means. You could get into peddling for very little capital. You just needed, and often local wholesalers here would give a man a stock, especially once they established a reputation for being reliable. So they could be on the road for very little and then work for a few years, save their money, and then start a business in Charlottetown. That was a very familiar pattern.
Peddling the back roads, or going to the country as the Lebanese called it, was the first step in the difficult effort to build a sense of home on the island. The peddlers would board the train in Charlottetown and get off in the country, often staying on the road for days at a time. One of the best-known peddlers was Tom Michael. He was well liked and admired, but in general, reaction from people in the country was mixed. The peddlers brought dry goods and jewelry, and news from the countryside, but they were definitely foreign. People often thought they were itinerant Greeks or Jews, and the language barrier made the going difficult. But the Lebanese persevered and worked hard at fitting in.
It took tremendous courage and initiative and ability. And I think my theory is that this is related to the history of Lebanon. Lebanon is a country where there are many peoples. There's a mix of Muslims and Christians and Druze, and they've been invaded. They've had all kinds of tension in that country for centuries. And I think the Lebanese have learned how to get along with people different than themselves. And I think that trait stood them in good stead as immigrants, that they knew how to adapt. They knew how to avoid giving offense. I think the Lebanese developed the ability to internalize their problems, and therefore were able to move smoothly into an alien community.
After peddling for a while, many of the early Lebanese immigrants moved back into Charlottetown permanently to open their own stores. And it was in town here that the real process of integrating into the community and establishing a sense of home began. For the men, doing business in their stores was enough. For the women, the continuing flow of immigrants from Lebanon helped. In a real way, a community that had existed in Lebanon was transposed to Charlottetown.
Virtually all the Lebanese on Prince Edward Island are related and interrelated. And almost all of them come from two small villages in southern Lebanon, a place called El Kafir and another place called Deir Mimas. And so it was a family chain migration, really, I think is the way you might describe it.
My heart is with you. Can this be my island too? Can this be my island too?
What kind of a sense of the band Haywire? For many people of Lebanese background, their heritage is something to be proud of, but it's not now of great significance to what they're doing. For many, the integration is complete. There are lawyers, dentists, doctors, and even opposition leaders. The range of occupations between Joe Giz and David Rashid suggests that perhaps the search for a home has ended in success. But it's still a community that to varying degrees acknowledges its traditions and uniqueness. The ability to feel at home in a wider island context was a product of first feeling at home within the Lebanese traditions here. As younger generations adapt to Canadian life, some of those traditions could be lost. It's the crackle and sizzle of a Lebanese tradition, shish kebab. Saeed Haddad is a master at promoting the culinary side of Lebanon's heritage in Charlottetown. Friends are expected later, so Saeed and his wife Suad are preparing a number of dishes. The Haddads arrived in Charlottetown in the early 1950s and opened the traditional corner store. They learned English and quickly expanded the store. It's now a fascinating mix of Lebanese traditions and Canadian conveniences. There's a video shop and a games arcade in the back, but it's also a place where experiences from the past are nurtured. The Haddad Grocery also acts as an informal school, educating the younger Lebanese. Today it's Saeed's grandsons. But a lot is learned of the old ways, just by watching the easy atmosphere that develops when everyone starts to arrive. First, there's the traditional Lebanese water pipe.
Here you go.
You have some coffee?
And then, of course, the famous Lebanese coffee.
When people hear that noise, that music and that, come on up, Haddad, or up anybody, you know, want to make coffee. Friend come and neighbor come and drink coffee.
The friendship and coffee drinking at Haddad's is a pretty good replica of the easy banter of the cafe back in Lebanon. It's a society very much built on the extended family. And here at Haddad's, that spirit is celebrated. But not everyone joins in. Some are comfortable with more familiar traditions, like hamburgers. But for the men at the counter, hamburgers just won't do. Haddad's brings a surprise. The nurturing of traditions in turn develops a sense of community among the Lebanese who feel strongly about their heritage. This feeling of home is different from the feeling of those who've completely adjusted to life here, but it's equally important. If some are too young to understand this, others perhaps feel the pull of Lebanon too much to ever let go.
Would you ever want to go back and live in Lebanon?
Oh, yeah. If the situation way lot's better than she is now, we'll be back anytime.
Even though you've been here for this long?
We work 16 hours a day. We only enough to pay our light and heat and like everything with nothing left over. So over there, if it's mostly the government look after, like you say, if you make a few money, the government take it. Over there, if you whatever you work, the money in your pocket, and you still spend more money in what you have here.
So you think perhaps life is better over there than here?
Oh, yeah. More enjoyable.
Then why are you still here?
Because you come and buy my blood.
We've been here like 35 years. It's hard for us to leave here right now. Very, very hard.
The Lebanon that Suad Haddad left behind is a land of contrasts. It's an old land steeped in antiquity and tradition. It's got sparkling beaches and serene countryside views. But it's also a modern land, known until recently as a sophisticated European-like country. Beirut once had the reputation as the Paris of the Middle East, a bright gem offering dazzling hospitality and delightful diversion.
For millennia.
For the Lebanese, the pull of the past is strong. If Saeed and Suad Haddad find their sense of home in holding on to the old traditions, Shihab is trying to put them behind him and get on with a new Saturday afternoon at the Lebanese school. For 2 hours, the teachers encourage the children to learn about the Lebanese language, alphabet, and customs. Saul Tweel, president of the Lebanese Association, feels it's an important effort.
We're teaching them their language and their dance and their song, actually, the national song. And we're trying to instill in them, keep in them the Lebanon itself, actually. They're keeping their heritage with them.
Does it worry you that as she grows up, she will perhaps become more and more Canadian and maybe lose some of the sense of Lebanese culture?
It doesn't worry me, no, not a bit, because it's my choice to be here. If it worries me for 1 second, I'll go back and live where I want, if that's what I want. It makes me see myself as a child when I see her doing the things that I did back home, which is nice. I think we always have the little person in us that we like to make it alive all the time. And that's what she does to me when she carries my tradition.
But the school is instructive beyond just imparting Lebanese traditions to the children. There's no effort here to change the children or to keep them from feeling completely at home in a Canadian setting. Instead, their Lebanese background enriches them and fits in with their new life. In their search to feel at home on the island, most Lebanese would aim for this goal. Mona came to the island 15 years ago. Things were harder then.
Because when I first came here, I couldn't I went to Holland College, and I thought it was really very hard for me this year that I went there, because I couldn't understand even their jokes. When we sit down in the cafeteria and they say a joke and everybody laughs, and the only reason I laughed is because I didn't want to look stupid.
But now the initial sense of challenge is gone. She feels something more important.
I feel more settled. It's the feeling of settlement that makes me lose that challenging thing. It might be more challenging to go back now than it is to be here.
The overwhelming feeling of having settled in a new land puts the seemingly exotic and different traditions of the Lebanese into perspective. For almost all the people here, there's an important feeling of cultural balance between the older traditions and the new, between Lebanese values and a Canadian way of life. And in remembering the one, the other is strengthened.
Very nice to have you. I think it's important for all people to remember who they are and where they came from. I was born here myself, and I have a strong feeling for Lebanon, although I've only been there twice, but even before I was there, I had a strong feeling for it. And I think everybody should have a strong feeling for where they came from.
The search to feel truly at home has come a long way from the days of peddling and speaking no English. In part, overcoming the adversity of the journey has given the community a sense of accomplishment, which gains from others recognition and acceptance.
Canadian Lebanese people have become very successful in PEI, commercially, professionally, and politically. We have established a credibility that is second to none. Thank you very much.
And it's from this that a sense of security grows. But security isn't something you talk about, you live it every day. And when it's really there, there's a kind of freedom to celebrate. In 2 years, the Lebanese community will be celebrating 100 years on the island. For many immigrant peoples coming to a new land, there's a fear of being different. And there's a rush to lose yourself in the wider culture. But the Lebanese here aren't in a rush, and one senses they never have been. For all of them, those long since integrated into island life, and those who take care to preserve their traditions, the importance of their heritage is always with them.
I think to build a good house, you should have a foundation. And if the past is your foundation, you build on that. You look to the future, yes, you live in the present now, but you should have a past to build on.
And although I'm not there, my heart is with you. Can this be my island too?
In Charlottetown, I'm Mark Daly for Compass.